Shalom from Jerusalem. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and this is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're marking today, day 494 since Hamas perpetrated its atrocities on October 7th of 2023, it is right now a type of ceasefire in the Gaza Strip in which we are waiting to see and hopefully realize the return of all hostages in Hamas captivity in the sequence of three separate stages. Nonetheless, there are some complications that have risen in the last 24 hours, as well as deadlines. One deadline by President Trump vis-a-vis the Gaza Strip and Hamas by Saturday noon. Another deadline for Lebanon specifically, expecting to see an IDF withdrawal by February 18th. All of that and much more we will discuss during today's edition. But initially, let's turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, if you may focus both on the Gaza Strip as well as on Lebanon, it's up to you what you would like to focus on first.
President Trump, in one of his sets of remarks or interviews, mentioned that there are two ceasefires, but that he is not certain whether they will hold. But let's put Lebanon aside for a moment because the main arena is in Gaza. We are more than 3 weeks into the ceasefire there. And up to now, even though there were some hitches along the road, the deal has been implemented by both sides. However, on Monday, Hamas all of a sudden threw a lot of doubt into the process by threatening to withhold the next batch of hostages to be released, 3 male Israelis. Now, they conditioned it. They said that this is until further notice. If Israel does not violate the agreement and retracts those violations, which according to Hamas, apparently it has to do with the number of trucks moving quote-unquote humanitarian aid, some of it not humanitarian, into Gaza. If that is being taken care of, the crisis will be over. But as you mentioned, President Trump grew impatient and said, let's stop these drips and drabs of 3 hostages here, 2 there, another 4. Let's swap all for all. Now, first of all, there is not necessarily an agreement on that on the Israeli side. And he did say that this is Israel's decision. He did not say that this is an American move. And secondly, Hamas will probably demand an end to the war, which is the difference between the current stage 1 and the future stage 2, about which the negotiations have not really started.
Stage 3 is the end of the war. Stage 2 is a partial withdrawal from critical positions, including the Philadelphia corridor on day 50.
This is really intended to drag out the process so that the Netanyahu government gets to the end of March, which is when the Knesset goes out of session, the winter session, and Netanyahu is home free with his coalition intact. So they are looking for some content to make the next 6 weeks somewhat useful.
They're looking to blackmail Israel, even though within the defense establishment here and the intelligence community, for that matter, they are calling out Hamas's bluff, knowing full well that it's not in a position to bargain, particularly when it does not want to re-enter into another cycle of deliberate hostilities. But let's now turn to elsewhere here in Jerusalem, where we're joined by Ori Saschar. the head of the research department at the Israel Defense and Security Forum, namely the IDSF, or as we call it here in Israel, Abitronistim. It's good to see you all. The deadline set by President Trump, good or bad?
Look, it's a cudgel, really, against Hamas. And President Trump, being a negotiator, and one of his spokespeople described it as viewing foreign relations through a real estate prism. He views everything as an opportunity, and I think it's a fresh approach. Look, Hamas has been using these poor hostages as a bargaining chip, and is trying to extort more concessions on Israel's part. We tend to agree we tend to accuse the government in Israel for all of its misdeeds, and we agree that there have been many faults in the process. But let's not forget who carried out a massacre, who kidnapped, took hostage 250 Israelis. These were Hamas. And so, first and foremost, we should ask ourselves, before looking introspectively into our own mistakes, where is Hamas's role in all that? Where is Iran's role in all of that? Sponsoring Hamas as its protege for many years, extorting billions of dollars from the US just for the benefit of cashing out and propagating terrorism around the region. So this is really what we should be looking at, and I think President Trump is losing his patience. We saw how he expressed himself about the hostages being released so thin and pale. Just last Saturday, from Hamas captivity, we heard really abhorrent descriptions on them being chained and starved in underground tunnels in the dark. This is inhumane, subhuman conditions that they're holding Israeli civilians. And so President Trump, I think, is doing a right move by sort of challenging Hamas and telling them, what do you want in exchange for all hostages? And so I think the dynamics here have to be clear. They have to come from a position of force. And we also are starting to lose our patience. So let's give it a shot. But I do think that it's an interesting approach.
Absolutely. Well, the King of Jordan is right now in the White House for meetings with U.S. President Donald Trump. It's too early, of course, to know what everything that is being discussed will yield at the other end of this meeting. But nonetheless, we did hear Ayman Safadi, the foreign minister of Jordan, express outright rejection to President Trump's plan for the Gaza Strip. Same goes for President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and a number of people. Of course, Badr Abdelati is currently in Washington, his foreign minister, for discussions. He already met with the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and it seems like the Americans are keen on further establishing or deepening the relationship between Cairo and Washington. Nonetheless, they do expect, of course, this to be a two-way street rather than just a give and not receive anything in return. But if we zoom out for a moment further from here, where are the Iranians in this whole equation?
Well, we heard and saw President Trump call on the Iranians to negotiate. What he said was that the 2015 JCPOA was a bad deal. Obviously, he revoked the American part of it in 2018. It was a bad deal, and anyway, it was about to expire and give the Iranians a clear path to nuclear weapons. He said, I will not stand for them having a nuclear weapon, and by the way, no one else too. He threw it as an aside. So he said there are two potential approaches to blocking the Iranian nuclear project. One is bombing it. Israel wants to do it either on its own or with us, American support or acquiescence, or to have a signed piece of paper, an agreement. I, President Trump, prefer to negotiate. So by saying that, he, of course, reflected his preference, but also kept a credible military threat as the other option. However, if you look at it and remember that the Iranian spokespeople not necessarily the rulers, not Khamenei, who is very anti-American now, but Zarif and others have said, yes, let's negotiate, let's talk. So we may see President Trump appoint an emissary or send Marco Rubio to have some talks, either at the UN or some back channel. And therefore, we will see not only the nuclear file, but also Iran's malign activities in the region, including its assistance to Hamas and Hezbollah as part of the agenda. It's really too early to predict if that can be productive.
With that being said, it's important to highlight, of course, that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is the only one who essentially calls the shots with regard to Iran's foreign policy and domestic endeavors. And taking that into account, we also hear the so-called pragmatic, Western leaning to a certain degree, or moderate, some call him, President Masoud Pezeshkian coming out and saying, the Americans are not negotiating in good faith. They claim to want to do it, and at the same time, they're slapping us with a maximum pressure campaign.
Well, it goes back to 1979, 1980. You had Khomeini, who called the shots, and you had Bani Sadr and Bazagan, who negotiated with the Americans, with Warren Christopher, the Deputy Secretary of State in Algiers. But eventually, the moderates never had the upper hand in the Islamic Republic.
Well, let me redefine this for a moment. I don't think there are any moderates in the government.
Relatively speaking.
Relative to the devil, a demon. I mean, ultimately, when we're talking about the Ayatollah regime, it's clear-cut in its methods and understandings. The only difference between one individual to another is the manner in which he conveys that message. But, Mr. Issachar, I'd like to ask you particularly about what should we take from the Iranian angle, since we did see on the first day since President Donald Trump decided to reinvigorate the maximum pressure campaign and reinforce the various mechanisms to ensure that it is indeed enforced overall. The Iranian market is plummeting. We're talking here about 17,000, 18,000 rials, a drop of 18,000 rials to the dollar, meaning it's now standing at over 340,000 or even more than that. So, I mean, this is the worst the Iranian economy has been in its history since the 1979 revolution.
Absolutely, and we're seeing how the real currency is plummeting as opposed to the US dollar. But look, the nuclear clock is ticking above Iran, and we all can talk about negotiations with Iran. They are world-class experts in negotiations, and to cheat their way into a nuclear bomb, we saw how the JCPOA, that was widely praised in the United States and in Europe as a way of, let's put it in the words of former President Obama, to shut down Iran's pathway to nuclear weapon without firing a single shot. Well, it did not, and Iran kept enriching in secret while the United States is fully aware. Israel, as you know, obtained the nuclear archives. That was the main trigger that catalyzed President Trump in his first term to withdraw from the JCPOA. The mistake was not to continue in a more, I would say, methodical way in this maximum pressure campaign. But now I don't think we're there at all. I think we're not in a point where we are starting to put up pressure and maximum pressure on Iran and negotiate. We're on the verge. Iran is on the cusp of obtaining nuclear weapons. All it requires is the green light from the supreme leader. And we see how both Prime Minister Netanyahu, the United States Director of Intelligence, voices from the top class of Israeli and American leadership who tell us that Iran is on the cusp of obtaining nuclear weapons within days if it so chooses. And so I'm not willing to have that Iranian gun on the table. The Middle East cannot possibly tolerate it, and we cannot afford a nuclear Iran. I am glad that President Trump has committed, like many presidents before him, never to allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons. But now we have to translate it into action. If they're willing to give negotiations a chance, fine. But in the end of the day, the end result should be that Iran not only sort of goes 2-3 steps backward, but actually dismantles its nuclear program. It's a regime that openly threatens to annihilate Israel, and the United States tried to assassinate President Trump. Some reports say with ground-to-air missiles, and send that assassin in Pennsylvania. We saw how Iran has funded Hamas to the point where it can carry out October 7th and is trying to assassinate people all over Europe and the United States. So I'm absolutely convinced that the Israelis and the Americans are seeing eye to eye on this. I think the big question right now is whether or not we have the courage to act. And I think, the United States has all the means to act. Negotiations are okay, but in the end, Iran is always traditionally leverage negotiations to the point where it simply obtains what it wants while it keeps negotiating and then enriching uranium in secret. We cannot possibly allow Iran to get nuclear weapons.
I completely agree, but nonetheless, I do think it's important to highlight with a point you made earlier. It's not only just the crime activity, really is criminal activity by the Iranians in Europe and the United States. It's also taking place in South America, where it has robust relations with the various cartels operating there. It has deep-rooted relations in Africa, including with the ANC in South Africa and elsewhere throughout the continent, as well as in Asia. So we're seeing the Iranians, not to forget Australia, where there were already a couple of incidents reported also by the Australian intelligence agency that has been very instrumental in various activities, also here in the Middle East and also vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic of Iran. But nonetheless, Mr. Oren, let's divert our attention one moment back to Lebanon. As I mentioned at the beginning, the deputy Middle East envoy of President Trump to the Middle East, Morgan Ortagus, she came and she stated, we expect the new government of Lebanon not to include Hezbollah, which has been defeated in the war against Israel, and Amal, which is also another Shiite organization. The Prime Minister of Lebanon, Nawaf Salam, came and defiantly declared, we have now established a new government. And in his declaration, lo and behold, we're having 5 members of Hezbollah and Amal taking key positions, including ministerial portfolios that are designated usually to the Shia community. But here we're seeing specifically Hezbollah individuals. I spoke with a number of people in Lebanon who told me that when we're talking about Hezbollah and Amal in particular, it is part of the mosaic of the composition, so to speak, of Lebanon. Is that something that we can expect retaliation for, since the United States has designated that specific point as a red line?
All politicians, when they have to choose between domestic and foreign policy considerations, look to their survival and to the widest consensus possible in the parliament and in the public. So as a goal, of course, it's a noble one, a goal of excluding Hezbollah and Amal from the government and giving the seats to other representatives of the Shiite community because of the arrangement in Lebanon and because of their relative strength in parliament. So while it should have been declared by the administration, by the Trump administration, that it prefers Hezbollah not to be there, nevertheless, if they want to avoid a new civil war, if they want to stabilize the government, they should accept it grudgingly. The question is, going back to what you mentioned regarding the February 18th deadline, whether it can be extended again. Right now, a week from the deadline, this is the goal, and Israel is making preparations. But if the LAF, the Lebanese Armed Forces, if they are not ready to go south and take over and bar Hezbollah from the villages adjacent to the border, then obviously Israel, which has been hitting Hezbollah targets, both
Hezbollah violations.
yes, but
To be
target,
specific.
it
Yes.
has, of course, violations and efforts to smuggle weapons in tunnels from the Syrian side of the border. If Israel sees that it is still being threatened and that the residents of the Galilee, kibbutzim, and moshavim are not able to be secure there, Israel will ask for another short extension. So we are a week away from the 18th. It is not yet set in stone that the IDF will withdraw.
Well, let's be frank here. The majority of villages and communities in northern Israel are Arab, Druze, Christian, Muslim. Ultimately, when Hezbollah was attacking the various communities in the north, the majority of those struck were Arab communities. So when we're looking at the broad scheme of things,
What do they care? It was Arab against Arab inside Lebanon or Syria in Lebanon. Arabs have been killing Arabs from time immemorial.
right. Well, Mr. Yisachar, when we're talking really on the Lebanese file, we're also seeing another complication. The Al Qaeda affiliate, Hayat Tahrir al Sham, which currently controls Damascus, has launched a attack to try and control the border of Lebanon, taking over also Lebanese territory for that matter. And there have been now a couple of days, I'm talking almost a week, of clashes between Hayat Tahrir al Sham and Hezbollah along the border. And now the Lebanese army has also scrambled to deploy additional forces to reinforce its own positions since it also came under fire. Are we expected to see here a situation where suddenly Lebanon and Syria plummet into war?
Look, it's not unthinkable, and I can see how HTS really are beginning to be more vengeful toward Hezbollah after so many years where Hezbollah militants really massacred people in Syria and fought HTS themselves while Hezbollah were assisting the Assad regime. So it's not unthinkable that they would deteriorate with such clashes. But let's also not forget that Ahmed al-Shara, the Syrian president, has publicly vowed not to entrench Syria in new wars, that they have not committed to counter neither Israel nor Russian presence in Syria for that matter. And so he's really at the point where he's trying to consolidate his own regime. We also see the entrenchments of that regime, really the former terrorist group that has now become, a full-fledged Surab regime, is now in control of Syria. And as a result, the next election that were promised a few months from now were said to be 4 years from now, and let's see about that too. So all these things really are, this is the puzzle of the Middle East with all the different actors. Iran's presence in Syria, it has been eliminated by this revolution, but now we may see Turkish presence in Syria full-fledged. There's already talks, high-level talks between Turkey and Syria on expanding bilateral relations, and we all know how Erdogan from Turkey was the one behind, really the puppeteer behind the HTS takeover of Syria. So all of these things really come together, and Hezbollah is caught up in the middle. But I also think that the West and the United States should look at it and see it as an opportunity to first sort of moderate the impact of the Syrian front on Israel. Yeah, we saw the Air Force striking there, but it's all in all much more moderated. I'm reminding you that the IDF eliminated the whole Syrian military within 48 hours. And then we see Lebanon, where Hezbollah and Amal, yes, Hezbollah sympathizer or Hezbollah real activists like Mohammed Haidar, who is now the Minister of Labor, as you said, 5 ministers out of 24 are in the new Lebanese government and against all commitments. So we'll see where Lebanon is going. But I do think that the West should look at it as an opportunity to bring back Syrian migrants from Europe and the United States into Syria to stabilize the Israeli northern front and to pave the path to some sort of calm. I wouldn't dare to say normalization. We're a long way from there, but we may see it in a distant future. But all eyes should be now on Iran. And the thought of preemptive military action in Iran, I'm glad it's viable and it's on the table, and it should be discussed in the highest levels in order to mitigate that threat. In the end, all the little fish in the puddle is nice to have, but when the big shark comes, which is the Iranian nuclear program, if we get to a point when Iran is nuclearized, like North Korea, it completely distorts the equation and brings the whole Middle East into imbalance. And so that's really what we should be focusing on, the Iranian nuclear program and how we must prevent it from ever happening.
Well, naturally, I'm also very keen on focusing on the Syria file. In addition, I think that's a fluid situation that has emerging complications. I will note one thing, though. Abu Muhammad al-Julani does not control Syria. That is, I can say so unequivocally. Talking from al-Hasaka in the northwest, where the Kurds are still the predominant force under the YPG or SDF, which is a US-backed constellation of various militias, all the way to Sweda, where the Druze are still controlling, and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has not entered despite attempts to do so. We have people like Ahmed al-Ode in Dir'a, who started the revolution against the Assad regime initially driving to Damascus, meeting up with al-Julani, and subsequently returning after announcing that he will support al-Julani. Now he declared that he will not support al-Julani and will fight against him vigorously. So we're seeing more and more Sunni, Shia, Druze, Christian, more and more rising up against him. And with, of course, the clam of various external forces also indicating their intention of not just rolling over and succumbing to whatever HTS wants to do. Turkey, despite backing Abu Muhammad al-Julani or Ahmed al-Shara, how he calls himself today, have possibly bet on the losing horse here. But time will tell. I'd like to immediately thank Mr. Amir Oren and Mr. Ori Saschar for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
I'm Eran Etzion, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.